A young woman devoted to her ancestral beliefs journeys across the desert to marry a prosperous rancher who sought a hard-working wife through correspondence, only to be harshly rejected when he discovers the depth of her spiritual practices. Abandoned in a lawless frontier settlement with meager resources, she finds unexpected protection from a notorious former gang leader with blood on his hands, who sees in her unwavering faith a path to his own salvation. This is a tale of holding true to one's convictions in the darkest hour and discovering divine purpose in the most unexpected souls. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The unforgiving sun blazed over Rattlesnake Junction as the stagecoach finally rattled to a stop after 4 grueling days traversing the parched landscape. Dust swirled around the wheels, momentarily obscuring the small cluster of buildings that constituted the frontier town. 26-year-old Layla Nazari pressed her fingertips against the coach window, taking in her first glimpse of the settlement that would become her home. The town seemed to shimmer in the heat, a mirage of civilization amid the vast emptiness of the Arizona territory. "Rattlesnake Junction! End of the line!" the driver called, his voice harsh from years of shouting over the rumble of wheels and the crack of his whip. Layla smoothed the wrinkles from her modest indigo dress, adjusting the delicate silver Hamza pendant that hung from a thin chain around her neck. Her mother's well-worn prayer book rested in her lap, its pages filled with generations of notations and prayers from her Persian ancestors. With her family now scattered, her parents returned to their homeland, and her brothers seeking fortunes in California, the sacred text represented her most cherished possession and tangible connection to her heritage's spiritual tradition. As she gathered her belongings, one carpet bag containing her clothing and a small wooden trunk holding her few treasures, Layla whispered a quiet prayer for strength. The correspondence with Douglas Farrow had been her anchor during the lonely months working as a seamstress in Chicago, where her exotic features and foreign accent had made true acceptance impossible. "Guide my steps on this new path," she murmured in her native tongue. "Help me to be a good wife and to honor my beliefs in this strange land." Farrow's letters had described a prosperous cattle ranch, a respectable home in need of a woman's touch, and his desire for a sensible, industrious woman of good character. His words had been respectful, expressing appreciation for her candor about her circumstances and the spiritual practices that sustained her. While not sharing her Persian Zoroastrian background, he had written that he respected her devotion and saw it as evidence of strong moral character. "Faith gives structure to life," he had written in flowing penmanship, "whatever form it takes." Stepping down from the stagecoach, Layla's practical boots settled into the dusty street. She scanned the small crowd of onlookers, searching for the man who matched Farrow's self-description, tall with sand-colored hair, clean-shaven, with a distinguished bearing that set him apart from typical frontier roughness. "Miss Nazari." She turned, hope rising in her chest. The man who approached was indeed tall and well-dressed in a tailored suit that seemed incongruous with the rustic surroundings. His hair was the promised sandy shade, though thinning at the temples, and his clean-shaven face bore the signs of someone who spent more time indoors than working the land. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, assessed her with clinical detachment. "Mr. Farrow?" she inquired, extending her gloved hand with a smile. "Douglas Farrow at your service." He took her hand briefly, the touch formal and perfunctory. "Welcome to Rattlesnake Junction. I trust your journey wasn't too arduous." "It was long but manageable," Layla replied, studying his face. Something in his manner felt different from the thoughtful correspondent whose letters she had read repeatedly. During her journey west, "I'm pleased to finally meet you in person." Pharaoh's eyes swept over her, taking in her modest dress, the Hamza at her neck, and the prayer book she clutched alongside her carpet bag. A flicker of what might have been disappointment crossed his features. Yes, well, you're exactly as you described yourself in your letters, refreshingly honest. His tone carried an undercurrent that Layla couldn't quite identify. I've arranged accommodations for you at the Desert Rose Inn. We'll dine this evening to discuss our arrangements. As they walked toward the modest two-story building that served as the town's only hotel, Layla became aware of curious glances from townsfolk going about their business. A group of rough-looking men outside the Coyote Saloon paused their conversation to watch them pass, one of them calling out, "Found yourself another one, hey, Pharaoh?" Pharaoh's jaw tightened, but he offered no response to the comment, increasing his pace slightly. Layla hurried to keep up, confusion beginning to stir within her. "Another one?" she ventured cautiously. "Pay them no mind," Pharaoh replied curtly. "Idle gossip is the primary entertainment in small towns like Rattlesnake Junction." The hotel proprietress, Mrs. Abernathy, a willowy woman with silver-streaked black hair and perceptive eyes, welcomed Layla warmly as Pharaoh made the introductions. "Miss Nazari will be staying with us temporarily," he explained, handing the woman payment. "Please see that she's comfortable. I'll return at 6 for dinner." With a perfunctory nod to Layla, he departed, leaving her standing awkwardly in the small lobby, her belongings at her feet. "Let me show you to your room, dear," Mrs. Abernathy said gently, picking up Layla's carpet bag. "You must be exhausted after your journey." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand and a window overlooking the main street. Once alone, Layla sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs suddenly weak as the reality of her situation settled over her. She was thousands of miles from everything familiar in a town where she knew no one, about to marry a man who already seemed different from his letters. Opening her mother's prayer book, Layla found comfort in the familiar passages. "Asha, truth and righteousness shall guide my path," she whispered, the ancient Zoroastrian principles anchoring her spirit. The words had guided her through many difficult moments, and she clung to them now, after washing away the dust of travel and changing into her best dress, a deep burgundy affair with subtle golden embroidery that spoke of her heritage without ostentation. Layla made her way downstairs at the appointed time. Pharaoh waited in the small dining room, all ready, seated at a corner table. He rose as she approached, pulling out her chair with practiced courtesy that seemed mechanical rather than genuine. "You look exotic," he commented as she took her seat, the words more assessment than compliment. "Thank you," Layla replied, folding her hands in her lap. "Mr. Pharaoh, I hope we might take this opportunity to become better acquainted. Your letters spoke of your ranch and your business interests, but I'd like to know more about you personally." Pharaoh studied her for a moment before answering. "My personal history is unremarkable. I established my ranching business 7 years ago when Rattlesnake Junction began to grow with the railroad expansion. I've diversified systematically, adding interests in the mercantile, the freight company, and several mining ventures. Business is my primary focus and passion." "And your family?" Layla asked. "My parents remained in St. Louis. I have limited contact with them." His tone discouraged further inquiry on that subject. "Now, Miss Nazari, perhaps you might explain something that has me curious." Layla nodded, encouraging him to continue. "Your letters mentioned your religious upbringing, but I notice you still wear symbols of your foreign beliefs." His gaze dropped pointedly to the Hamza at her neck. "I'm concerned about what that might mean for our potential arrangement." Before Layla could respond, a server arrived with their meals, tough beef stew and cornbread that required considerable effort to chew. They ate in uncomfortable silence for several minutes, Layla's mind racing to understand Pharaoh's apparent concern with her spiritual practices. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Finally, she spoke. Mr. Pharaoh, I've always been forthright about my beliefs. They are central to who I am. But I assure you, I understand the practical aspects of marriage and am capable of managing a household, supporting your business interests, and being a proper wife. Pharaoh set down his spoon with deliberate care. Yes, well, there's appropriately religious, and then there's... He gestured vaguely at her. Excessively devoted to foreign customs. I need a practical partner, Miss Nazari, not someone who will spend hours in strange prayers, or who will introduce exotic rituals that might raise eyebrows among my business associates. Layla's cheeks flushed with indignation. Sir, my faith guides my principles, but it has never prevented me from fulfilling my responsibilities. In fact, it strengthens my commitment to hard work and honorable dealings. Perhaps in Chicago, Pharaoh replied dismissively. The frontier operates by different rules. Business opportunities here require flexibility, compromise, adaptation to local ways. Your letters presented you as sensible and practical. I'm concerned your foreign religious practices might interfere with what I require in a wife. And what exactly do you require, Mr. Pharaoh? Layla asked, her voice steady, despite the growing knot in her stomach. Pharaoh leaned forward, lowering his voice. Rattlesnake Junction is a growing community, Miss Nazari. I've established myself as its leading businessman, but maintaining that position requires a certain image. I need a wife who enhances my standing, who understands discretion, and who won't embarrass me with foreign customs or impose restrictive moral judgments on necessary business practices. The meaning behind his carefully chosen words became increasingly clear. Pharaoh wasn't seeking a partner who shared his values. He wanted someone who would adopt his image entirely, abandoning her own identity and principles. More disturbing was the implication that his business dealings required moral compromise he expected his wife to overlook. I see, Layla said quietly. Then I believe there has been a significant misunderstanding between us. Perhaps, Pharaoh admitted, with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. But consider your situation carefully before making hasty decisions. You've traveled a considerable distance at significant expense. Chicago is a long journey back, especially for a woman in your circumstances, alone with limited funds and such distinctive features. Few respectable options await you here or elsewhere. The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Accept his terms or face destitution in a town where she knew no one, and where her Persian features would make her perpetually an outsider. I will not compromise my principles, Mr. Pharaoh, regardless of my circumstances, Layla stated, rising from the table, with dignity despite her trembling hands. Good evening. As she turned to leave, Pharaoh's voice followed her, low and threatening. Consider carefully, Miss Nazari. Rattlesnake Junction can be quite inhospitable to women without protection or purpose, especially those who appear so different. Layla maintained her composure until she reached her room, where she sank onto the bed, the full weight of her situation crashing down upon her. She was stranded in an unfamiliar frontier town, her savings depleted by the journey west, with no immediate prospects and no one to turn to. For the first time since her family had scattered, she allowed herself to weep, tears flowing freely as she clutched her mother's prayer book. What purpose does this serve? She whispered into the growing darkness. Why have I been led so far, from everything I know, only to face rejection? Eventually her tears subsided, replaced by the quiet determination that had sustained her through previous hardships. She would not allow despair to overcome her faith. There must be a path forward, even if she couldn't yet see it. The ancient teachings of her ancestors spoke of darkness preceding dawn, of trials that tested one's devotion to truth and righteousness. This was merely another such test. A gentle knock at her door startled her from her prayers. Mrs. Abernathy stood in the hallway, concern evident in her kind eyes. "I thought you might appreciate some tea, dear," the older woman said, offering a steaming cup. "The first night in a strange place is always difficult." Layla accepted the tea gratefully, inviting Mrs. Abernathy to sit. The innkeeper hesitated, only briefly before settling into the room's single chair. "I couldn't help but notice your dinner with Mr. Farrow ended abruptly," Mrs. Abernathy ventured carefully. "Mr. Farrow and I discovered we have incompatible expectations," Layla replied diplomatically, sipping the soothing chamomile tea. Mrs. Abernathy nodded, unsurprised. "You're not the first, you know. There have been others, at least two that I'm aware of, young women who arrived by stagecoach full of hope, only to depart shortly after meeting Douglas Farrow." "What happened to them?" Layla asked, a chill running through her. "The first left immediately, apparently having family in Santa Fe who could assist her. The second—" Mrs. Abernathy's expression darkened. She had nowhere to go, and insufficient funds to leave. She eventually took work at the Coyote Saloon, not as a barmaid, mind you. The innkeeper didn't need to finish her sentence for Layla to understand. "I see," Layla said quietly, her stomach tightening with fear. "How are you?" "Situated, dear?" "Financially, I mean," Mrs. Abernathy asked gently. Layla hesitated, reluctant to reveal her vulnerability, but recognizing that she needed guidance. "I have enough for perhaps 2 weeks' lodging. The journey west was expensive." Mrs. Abernathy's face creased with concern. "And do you have family who might send assistance?" "No one within reach," Layla admitted. "My parents have returned to Persia. My brothers are somewhere in California, but we've lost touch." She straightened her shoulders, determined not to appear pitiful. "I'm willing to work, Mrs. Abernathy. I'm skilled with a needle. I made all my own clothing. I can cook Persian dishes that might bring novelty to your dining room. I can keep accounts and have beautiful penmanship." Mrs. Abernathy considered this information thoughtfully. Rattlesnake Junction isn't Chicago. There's no proper dressmaker, though folks might appreciate quality mending. The railroad office occasionally needs clerical help, but they typically hire men. She paused, thinking. The school is seeking a teacher, but the position doesn't start until autumn, nearly 2 months away. Hope flickered briefly in Layla's chest. A teaching position would be ideal, allowing her to use her education while maintaining her dignity. "I know the school board chairman," Mrs. Abernathy offered. "I could arrange an introduction. In the meantime—" She hesitated clearly, uncomfortable with what she was about to suggest. "I could use help here at the inn. It wouldn't pay much, just room and board, but it would give you time to secure something more suitable." Tears of gratitude welled in Layla's eyes. "That's incredibly kind, Mrs. Abernathy." "Not kindness, practicality," the older woman replied, briskly, though her eyes remained gentle. "I'm not as young as I once was, and good help is scarce in Rattlesnake Junction. Most able-bodied women are already married, and the few single ladies are either spoken for or—" She glanced toward the direction of the saloon. "Otherwise employed." They agreed that Layla would help with cleaning rooms, serving breakfast to guests, and managing the front desk during Mrs. Abernathy's errands. The arrangement wouldn't advance her financial situation, but it would prevent it from deteriorating further while she sought more permanent employment. As Mrs. Abernathy rose to leave, she hesitated at the door. "One more thing, Miss Nazari. Be careful around Douglas Farrow. He doesn't take rejection well, especially when it challenges his self-image. He has significant influence in Rattlesnake Junction, owns the mercantile, has interests in the mines, holds notes on half the businesses in town. People who cross him often find themselves facing difficulties. The warning sent a chill through Layla, but she nodded her understanding. "Thank you for your candor, Mrs. Abernathy." "Vivian," the innkeeper replied with a warm smile. "Rest well, Layla. In my experience, things often appear brighter in the morning light." As Rattlesnake Junction settled into darkness, only the distant sound of a coyote's howl disturbed the silence. Layla stood at her window, watching as the stars emerged with remarkable clarity in the desert sky. These were the same stars her ancestors had studied for centuries, finding in their patterns divine guidance and cosmic order. Somehow, the realization that even here, thousands of miles from her homeland, the same celestial light touched her, brought unexpected comfort. "The path is not always clear," she whispered, recalling her grandmother's favorite saying, "but the light of truth never truly fades from those who seek it." The sun had barely crested the distant mesas when Layla began her first full day at the Desert Rose Inn. She rose early, drawing comfort from her morning prayers before donning a simple grey dress with subtle embroidery at the cuffs. Practical, enough for housework, yet maintaining the dignified appearance she valued. Her long, dark hair was neatly braided and pinned, the silver hamsa once again hanging at her throat despite Pharaoh's obvious disapproval. Life in Rattlesnake Junction quickly revealed itself to be both simpler and more complex than Chicago. The bare desert settlement operated at a different rhythm, with businesses opening early to take advantage of cooler morning hours. By mid-afternoon, when heat shimmered off the dusty streets, many shops closed until evening brought relief from the scorching sun. Vivian Abernathy proved to be a fair-minded employer, patient in her instructions, yet maintaining high standards for her establishment. "The Desert Rose may be the only hotel in 50 miles, she explained, as she showed Layla how to properly turn down beds according to her exacting specifications. But that's no excuse for mediocrity. Standards matter, especially in places where civilization hangs by a thread. Layla took to her duties with the same conscientious attention she applied to all aspects of her life. Each task, however humble, deserved her full effort, a principle her father had instilled in her from childhood. "All honest work carries dignity," he'd often said. "The manner in which you sweep a floor reflects the quality of your soul." It was while she was sweeping the front porch, 3 days into her new position, that Layla experienced her first direct taste of the town's reaction to her presence. 2 women approaching the inn slowed their pace, openly staring before whispering, behind gloved hands. "Is it true she's some kind of pagan?" one asked, voice deliberately pitched to carry. "Pharaoh says she has strange idols and chants to foreign spirits," the other replied. "Can you imagine such a person teaching our children?" Layla continued her sweeping, back straight and expression composed, despite the burning in her cheeks. The women's disapproving glances fell upon her hamsa pendant, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Good morning, ladies," she greeted them, with deliberate politeness. "May I help you with something?" Their startled expressions at being directly addressed almost made Layla smile. The older of the 2 recovered first, drawing herself up with self-importance. "We're here to see Mrs. Abernathy about arrangements for the harvest social," she announced, as if expecting to be challenged. "Of course," Layla replied smoothly. "She's expecting you. Please come in." As she held the door, she heard the younger woman mutter, "At least she speaks proper English. From what Mr. Pharaoh said, I expected some kind of barbarian." The women's visit was brief but illuminating. Through the thin walls separating the lobby from the kitchen where Layla prepared refreshments, she overheard fragments of conversation that confirmed her growing suspicions. Pharaoh had wasted no time in portraying her as dangerously foreign, unsuitable for proper society, and potentially threatening to community values. The women, Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Webb, wives of the town banker and general store owner respectively. And Dee seemed eager to accept his characterization without question. "You've chosen a difficult path keeping her on," Mrs. Henderson remarked to Vivian. "Douglas Farrow has considerable influence with the town council. The inn's license comes up for renewal soon, does it not?" "My affairs are in order, Gertrude," Vivian replied with steel beneath her courtesy, "and I choose my staff based on their merits, not others' prejudices." "Well, I certainly hope you know what you're doing," Mrs. Webb added. "People talk, Vivian. The wrong associations can damage a business beyond repair." When Layla entered with the tea tray, conversation ceased abruptly, replaced by thin smiles and assessing glances. She served them with perfect form, her years in cultured Persian households evident in every graceful movement. If they expected a savage, she would show them generations of refinement instead. After they departed, Vivian found Layla in the kitchen, vigorously kneading dough for the next morning's bread. "You heard, I suppose?" the innkeeper asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Enough," Layla acknowledged, punching down the dough with perhaps more force than necessary. "Mr. Farrow is determined to make my position here untenable. He doesn't like losing," Vivian agreed, "especially not to someone he underestimated." She studied Layla thoughtfully. "You know, there's an interesting pattern to Douglas Farrow's mail-order bride attempts. Each woman has been progressively more unusual by local standards. First a Boston schoolteacher, too opinionated. Then a widowed nurse from Philadelphia, too independent. Now you. He seeks women of substance but cannot tolerate the very qualities that make them substantial," Layla observed. "Precisely." Vivian nodded. "He wants the appearance of refinement without the inconvenience of dealing with an actual refined mind. A decorative wife who enhances his status while remaining conveniently pliable." The front door's bell jingled, interrupting their conversation. Vivian straightened. "That will be our regular Wednesday guests, the supply wagon from Copper Creek Mine. They stop here coming and going from the railroad depot." Layla washed flour from her hands and smoothed her apron before following Vivian to the front desk. 4 men had entered, trail-dusty, weather-beaten figures whose appearance suggested hard physical labor. 3 headed directly to the dining room with the casual familiarity of regular visitors, but the 4th remained behind, conducting business with Vivian. He was a sturdy man of middle years with graying temples and a meticulously trimmed beard that contrasted with his otherwise rugged appearance. What caught Layla's attention, however, were his hands. Large, powerful, but moving with unexpected precision as he counted out payment for their rooms. On his right wrist, partially concealed by his sleeve, was an intricate tattoo unlike any Layla had seen in America, reminiscent of designs she remembered from Turkish merchants who had visited her father's home in Persia. "Miss Nazari will show you to your usual rooms, Mr. Rivera," Vivian said, gesturing toward Layla. "She's new to our establishment, but learning quickly." The man turned, dark eyes briefly assessing Layla before offering a respectful nod. "Ma'am," he acknowledged simply. As Layla led him upstairs, she was acutely aware of his measured tread behind her, neither hurrying nor lagging. Unlike many men she'd encountered in America, his gaze didn't linger inappropriately, instead remaining courteous but reserved. "You're a long way from home," he observed, as she opened the door to the first room. Layla paused, surprised by the comment. "Yes," she admitted. "How did you know?" A faint smile creased the weathered lines around his eyes. "I've traveled extensively. Your pendant, the Hamza. I've seen similar in my journeys through Ottoman territories. You recognize it?" Few Americans had shown any knowledge of her cultural symbols. "The hand of protection," he replied, "common among various peoples from the Mediterranean to Persia, though I suspect most folks around here mistake it for something more sinister." "They do seem determined to misunderstand," Layla acknowledged. Rivera nodded thoughtfully. Frontier towns fear what they don't comprehend, makes them easy to manipulate by men like Pharaoh. Layla's surprise must have shown on her face, for Rivera continued, Word travels fast in small communities, Miss Nazari. Your arrival and subsequent independence from Pharaoh's plans is already becoming legend in certain circles. I simply couldn't compromise my principles, she replied. Principles are rare commodities out here, Rivera observed. Most get traded away for security or profit. He accepted the room key from her hand. Miguel Rivera, by the way, foreman at Copper Creek. Layla Nazari, she responded with a slight bow of her head, the formal greeting of her homeland emerging. Instinctively. I know, he replied simply, disappearing into his room and leaving Layla with the peculiar sensation of having been evaluated by a man whose judgment somehow mattered. Later that evening, after the dining room had cleared and Layla was helping Vivian with final cleanup, the innkeeper shared what she knew about Miguel Rivera. Fascinating man, she remarked, polishing silverware by lamplight, came to the territory about 5 years ago, already experienced in mining operations. Speaks 4 languages that I know of, English, Spanish, French, and something middle. Eastern I can't identify. Arabic, perhaps, Layla suggested, remembering the tattoo, or Turkish. Possibly. The miners respect him, not from fear, but genuine regard. He runs Copper Creek with remarkable efficiency, yet treats the men fairly, which is uncommon in these parts. Mr. Pharaoh doesn't approve of him, Layla guessed. Vivian's laugh was sharp and brief. Pharaoh loathes him. Tried to buy Copper Creek 2 years ago when the original owner died, but Rivera produced documents showing partnership rights and took control instead. It's the only major business venture in the region Pharaoh doesn't influence. She placed the last fork in the drawer. They maintain a cold civility in public, but there's genuine animosity beneath. Rivera represents everything Pharaoh resents. A self-made man who succeeded through merit rather than manipulation, who commands respect without demanding it. This information settled in Layla's mind, adding another dimension to her understanding of Rattlesnake Junction's complex social landscape. She discovered that frontier towns weren't the lawless chaos depicted in sensationalist novels, but rather intricate webs of alliances, resentments, and power struggles, not unlike the Persian court politics her father had sometimes described from his youth. The following morning brought a letter from the school board chairman, Mr. Peterson, agreeing to meet with Layla regarding the teaching position. Vivian's influence had secured the interview despite Pharaoh's obvious campaign against her. It's scheduled for Tuesday next week, Vivian informed her over early morning coffee. That gives us time to prepare. Peterson is a reasonable man, but incautious. The fact that he's willing to meet you despite Pharaoh's objections is promising. What should I expect? Layla asked. Questions about your education, certainly. Your background may concern them. Not your heritage specifically, but whether you can relate to frontier children and their needs. Vivian considered further. They'll likely ask about your religious practices too, given how Pharaoh has characterized them. Be honest but pragmatic. Focus on universal values rather than specific rituals. Layla nodded, grateful for the guidance. The teaching position represented her best chance for permanent independence in Rattlesnake Junction, meaningful work that would utilize her education while providing sufficient income for modest self-sufficiency. Her hope was short-lived, however. That very afternoon, Douglas Pharaoh himself appeared at the inn, his expression coldly triumphant as he approached the front desk where Layla was recording the day's transactions in the ledger. Miss Nazari, he greeted her with exaggerated courtesy. Adapting to menial work, I see. How resourceful. Mr. Pharaoh, Layla acknowledged without looking up from her writing. Is there something I can help you with today? Actually, I came to inform Mrs. Abernathy, about some unfortunate news, he replied, satisfaction evident in his tone. But since you're here, I might as well tell you directly. The school board meeting regarding your application has been cancelled. Now Layla did look up, meeting his pale eyes steadily. Cancelled or postponed? Permanently tabled, I'm afraid. The board received some concerning information about your religious practices. They've determined you would be unsuitable for molding young minds. The calculated cruelty of his interference stoked a quiet anger in Layla's chest, but she maintained her composure. What specific concerns were raised, Mr. Farrow? My dedication to truth and righteousness, my beliefs in the sanctity of honest work and moral integrity. Which of these principles frightened the board? Farrow's self-satisfied expression faltered slightly at her direct challenge. This is a Christian community, Miss Nazari. Your foreign idolatry— I have no idols, Layla interrupted firmly. My faith forbids them. The only thing I worship is the Creator of all things, the same divine source Christians acknowledge, merely understood through different traditions. Semantics, Farrow dismissed with a wave of his hand. The result remains the same. The teaching position is closed to you. He leaned slightly over the counter, lowering his voice. You should reconsider your options, Miss Nazari. My offer remains open, temporarily. A woman of your unusual background has limited prospects. Here, I believe we've already established that I won't compromise my principles for convenience, Layla replied evenly. If you've delivered your message, Mr. Farrow, I have work to complete. His eyes narrowed at her continued defiance. Pride comes before a fall, Miss Nazari. Remember that your position here is precarious. Mrs. Abernathy cannot protect you indefinitely, not when her business license depends on town council approval. Before Layla could respond to this thinly veiled threat, the front door opened. Miguel Rivera entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. His timing was so fortuitous that Layla wondered if he had been watching Farrow's movements. Afternoon, Rivera greeted with deliberate neutrality, though his dark eyes quickly assessed the tension between them. Rivera, Farrow acknowledged stiffly, straightening to his full height. I didn't realize Copper Creek required accommodations midweek. Business at the assay office, Rivera replied, his tone revealing nothing. Thought I'd arrange rooms for next week's supply run while I was in town. He placed his hat on the counter, a casual action that nevertheless established his place in the conversation. Everything all right here? The question, though general, carried an undercurrent that wasn't lost on either Layla or Farrow. Rivera's steady presence seemed to shift the balance of power in the small lobby. Merely conveying some information to Miss Nazari, Farrow replied, his affable mask returning. Town business? Nothing more? Indeed, Rivera commented, his skepticism evident. Town business seems to follow Miss Nazari with remarkable consistency. Farrow's smile tightened. Well, I've said what I came to say. Good day to you both. With a curt nod, he departed, his measured stride betraying irritation despite his controlled expression. As the door closed behind him, Rivera turned to Layla. School board? He inquired simply. How did you know? She asked, surprised. Peterson mentioned yesterday that Farrow called an emergency meeting. Didn't require much deduction. He studied her face. You're holding up well under the pressure. I've faced worse, Layla replied, though in truth, Farrow's calculated campaign to isolate her was beginning to take its toll. Each potential avenue of independence closed off, each new threat to her tentative security weighed heavily on her spirit. Rivera seemed to sense this despite her composed exterior. Persecution often reveals character, both in those who inflict it and those who endure it. The observation struck Layla as unusually perceptive. You sound as though you speak from experience, Mr. Rivera. A shadow crossed his weathered features. Perhaps, but this isn't about me. He straightened, returning to practical matters. I'll need 3 rooms for Tuesday next week, my usual, plus 2 for the new engineers coming to assess the eastern shaft. As Layla recorded the reservation, she felt Rivera watching her with an intensity that wasn't intrusive, but rather evaluative. When she finished, he remained at the counter instead of departing immediately. "Miss Nazari," he began after a moment's consideration. "Copper Creek employs a teacher for the miners' children. Small operation, only 8 students currently. But we provide decent compensation and living quarters at the camp." The unexpected opening caught Layla by surprise. "You're offering me employment?" "Considering it," he clarified. "Our previous teacher returned east last month. Family illness. Children's education has suffered in the interim." "Mr. Farrow would not approve," Layla observed. "Farrow holds no authority at Copper Creek," Rivera stated flatly. "The mine operates independently under territorial charter." Hope sparked in Layla's chest, though she tempered it with practical questions. What would the position entail exactly? Basic education, reading, writing, arithmetic, history. Classes 6 days weekly, mornings only, afternoons for individual. Tutoring as needed. He paused, then added, "Your religious background would be your own business, provided you don't impose specific practices on the children." "I would never do so," Layla assured him. "Education and faith are separate matters, though both require respect for truth and dedication to learning." Rivera nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response. "We have families of various backgrounds. At the camp, Mexican, Irish, German, 2 Chinese engineers. Tolerance is necessary, not merely preached." "When would you need an answer?" Layla asked, mind already calculating what such a position would mean for her precarious situation. "Take a week to consider," Rivera replied. "I'll return next Wednesday for your decision. Meanwhile, I suggest discretion. Farrow has ears everywhere, and he'll likely try to interfere if he learns of the opportunity." After Rivera departed, Layla stood motionless behind the counter, processing the unexpected turn of events. The teaching position at Copper Creek represented not just employment, but escape from Farrow's sphere of influence, a chance to build something meaningful beyond his reach. Yet questions remained. Why had Rivera offered her this opportunity? Was it merely a practical solution to his need for a teacher, or did it represent some extension of his apparent conflict with Farrow? And what would life be like at a remote mining camp, among strangers whose customs and expectations remained unknown? That evening, as twilight painted Rattlesnake Junction in deepening purple shadows, Layla climbed to the inn's flat roof, where Vivian had created a small garden of desert plants. There, surrounded by flowering cacti and small succulents that thrived in the harsh environment, she performed her evening prayers as stars emerged in the vast desert sky. "Guide me toward truth," she whispered in her native tongue, the familiar rhythms of devotion strengthening her resolve. "Show me the path of righteousness in this strange land." As she finished, she became aware of a figure watching from the street below, a tall silhouette that could only belong to Miguel Rivera. He remained motionless for a moment, then touched his hat in silent acknowledgement before disappearing into the gathering darkness. The brief encounter left Layla with the curious sense that she had been witnessed rather than merely observed. Her devotion respected rather than judged, a distinction few in Rattlesnake Junction seemed capable of making. Dawn painted the distant mesas with golden light as Layla finished her morning prayers. 7 days had passed since Miguel Rivera's unexpected job offer, and today he would return for her answer. She had spent the week in careful contemplation, weighing the opportunity against the considerable uncertainties it presented. Copper Creek lay 15 miles north of Rattlesnake Junction, close enough for occasional visits to town but far enough to be beyond Douglas Farrow's immediate influence. According to Vivian, the mining camp housed nearly 60 workers and a dozen families in a settlement that, while rustic, maintained better order than many frontier communities. Rivera runs a disciplined operation, Vivian had explained. No gambling, limited alcohol, and troublemakers find themselves seeking employment elsewhere promptly. The families there live simply but decently. As Layla pinned her hair and secured her Hamza pendant, she'd already made her decision. Teaching at a remote mining camp hadn't been part of her plans when she'd journeyed west, but neither had being stranded in a hostile town with dwindling prospects. At least Copper Creek offered meaningful work and escape from Pharaoh's targeted campaign against her. The morning passed with painful slowness as Layla attended to her duties at the inn. Each time the bell above the door jingled, she looked up expectantly, only to feel a pang of disappointment when the arrival wasn't Rivera. By midday, anxiety began to gnaw at her composure. Had he reconsidered? Had Pharaoh somehow discovered and sabotaged this opportunity as well? It was nearly 3 o'clock when the door finally opened to admit Miguel Rivera, his normally stoic expression showing signs of strain. Dust covered his clothing, and a fresh cut marked his left cheekbone. "Mr. Rivera," Layla greeted him with concern. "Are you injured?" "Nothing serious," he dismissed, approaching the counter where she stood. "Encountered some trouble on the road. I need to speak with you privately, if possible." Layla glanced toward the kitchen where Vivian was preparing dinner. "We can use the small parlor. It's empty at this hour." Once the parlor door closed behind them, Rivera's controlled demeanor shifted, revealing genuine urgency. "Have you considered my offer?" he asked without preamble. "Yes," Layla replied, watching him carefully. "I've decided to accept the position." Relief crossed his weathered features. "Good. We need to leave immediately." "Today?" Layla hadn't expected such haste. "I haven't prepared or given Mrs. Abernathy notice." "There's been a development," Rivera interrupted. 3 men ambushed me on the road back from Copper Creek. They carried a message from Pharaoh: stay away from his property or face consequences. Layla's indignation flared. "His property? I am no man's property." "Pharaoh believes otherwise," Rivera stated grimly. "He's learned of our conversation last week, likely from one of the dining room staff. He's accelerating his efforts to control your situation." The implication settled heavily in Layla's chest. "The men who attacked you, were they the sheriff's deputies?" Rivera's expression confirmed her suspicion. "Sheriff Fletcher's loyalty belongs to whoever pays best. Currently, that's Pharaoh." "Why go to such lengths?" Layla wondered aloud. "I'm just one woman who refused his terms." "It's no longer about you specifically," Rivera explained. "It's about control and making an example. Pharaoh can't allow anyone to defy him successfully. It undermines his authority. You've become a symbol now, and symbols are dangerous to men like him." The parlor door opened as Vivian entered, her expression grave. "I heard enough," she said. "Layla, Mr. Rivera is right. You need to leave today. I've suspected Pharaoh was planning something drastic." "What do you mean?" Layla asked. Vivian closed the door firmly behind her. "The town council meeting yesterday, Pharaoh introduced an ordinance requiring single women to have proper sponsorship to reside in town, ostensibly to maintain moral standards, but clearly aimed at you. With his influence, it will pass," Rivera added. "Once it does, you'll have no legal right to remain at the inn without a male guardian's approval, which Pharaoh will ensure you don't receive unless you accept his terms." The calculated malice of Pharaoh's strategy left Layla momentarily speechless. He had systematically eliminated every option except submission to his will or destitution. "I can pack my belongings quickly," she said finally. "Decision made." When can we depart?" "As soon as you're ready," Rivera replied. "I have a wagon waiting at the livery stable. We should reach Copper Creek before nightfall if we leave within the hour. Use the back stairs and the service entrance, Vivian advised. Pharaoh has men watching the front of the inn. I noticed them taking shifts since this morning. As Layla hurried upstairs to gather her few possessions, her mind raced with the sudden acceleration of events. She had come to America seeking stability and purpose after her family's dispersal. Instead, she found herself fleeing one precarious situation for another, placing her trust in a man she barely knew simply because he opposed the man who threatened her. Yet, beneath her apprehension ran a current of fierce determination. Whatever lay ahead at Copper Creek, it represented her choice rather than Pharaoh's coercion, a crucial distinction that made all the difference to her sense of dignity. It took less than 20 minutes to pack her carpet bag and small trunk. Her possessions were few: several modest dresses, her mother's prayer book, a small box containing family mementos, and the tools of her trade: needles, thread, embroidery materials, and the few educational books she had brought from Chicago. In anticipation of teaching, Vivian met her in the narrow hallway, pressing a small bundle into her hands. "Food for the journey," she explained, "and a letter of introduction to Mrs. Caldwell at Copper Creek. She's the mine engineer's wife and acts as unofficial matron of the camp. Having an ally among the women will make your transition easier." "How?" "Can I thank you for everything?" Layla asked, emotion tightening her throat. Despite its brevity, her time at the Desert Rose Inn had provided crucial sanctuary when she most needed it. "By thriving," Vivian answered simply. "Success is the best revenge against men like Pharaoh. Now go. Rivera is waiting by the kitchen." Adore. Their departure from Rattlesnake Junction proved more complicated than anticipated. As Rivera guided the wagon through back alleys to avoid main streets, they nearly collided with Sheriff Fletcher and two deputies emerging from the back door of the Coyote Saloon. "That's Rivera!" one deputy shouted, pointing. "And the foreign woman!" "Drive!" Layla urged as the men moved toward them. Rivera snapped the reins, and the team lurched forward, forcing the sheriff and his men to leap aside. Shouts followed them, along with a warning shot fired into the air. "They won't pursue immediately," Rivera stated, keeping the horses at a steady pace as they reached the northern road. "Fletcher's too cautious to leave town without preparation, especially with Pharaoh's instructions to follow. But they'll come after us once they've gathered men and supplies." "Will they reach us before Copper Creek?" Layla asked, glancing anxiously. "Behind them, not if we maintain this pace," Rivera assured her. "The road grows rough ahead, difficult to navigate at speed if you don't know it well. I know every turn." As they left Rattlesnake Junction behind, the landscape opened into vast desert vistas punctuated by towering rock formations. The beauty of it caught Layla's breath despite their circumstances. Endless sky stretching above terrain painted in impossibly vivid reds, oranges, and purples. It reminded her strangely of Persian poetry describing paradise, vast openness where the soul finally breathes freely. Rivera maintained silence for the first hour, his attention focused on handling the team across increasingly difficult terrain. When they paused briefly to rest the horses at a small spring, he finally addressed the question Layla had been hesitant to ask. "You're wondering why I'm involving myself in your troubles?" he stated rather than asked, offering her a canteen of water. "The thought had crossed my mind," Layla admitted, gratefully accepting the drink. "Your conflict with Pharaoh predates my arrival, but your actions suggest something more personal than business rivalry." Rivera leaned against the wagon wheel, studying her with that same evaluative gaze she'd noticed in their previous encounters. "You're observant," he acknowledged. "Most people in these parts aren't interested in motivations beyond self-interest." He removed his hat, revealing a long scar that disappeared into his hairline, previously hidden by the hat's brim. 6 years ago, I wasn't a mine foreman. I led a different life with a different name, made enemies of powerful men through investigations that exposed their corruption. One of those men was Vernon Hargrove, Douglas Farrow's former business partner and mentor. What happened? Layla asked, sensing they had reached the heart of the matter. Hargrove arranged an ambush, Rivera continued, his voice matter-of-fact despite the gravity of his words. My wife and daughter were traveling with me. They didn't survive. The simple statement, delivered without embellishment, carried such profound loss that Layla momentarily closed her eyes against its weight. I'm deeply sorry, she said softly. I survived only because passing Navajo traders found me and tended my wounds, Rivera continued. When I recovered enough to function, I tracked Hargrove west until his trail led to Rattlesnake Junction. Then he died of typhoid, but his apprentice Farrow had inherited his methods, his connections, and his approach to eliminating obstacles. You came seeking justice, Layla observed. Initially, Rivera confirmed, but something unexpected happened. The Navajo healer who saved my life spoke wisdom I wasn't ready to hear until pain forced me to listen. He said, "Vengeance is a prison you build yourself. Justice comes from creating what your enemy would destroy." He replaced his hat, adjusting it against the harsh sun. So instead of killing Farrow, I built something he couldn't control, a mining operation that treats men fairly, that creates community rather than exploitation. Each family at Copper Creek represents a small victory against everything Farrow stands for. The revelation of Rivera's background transformed Layla's understanding of his interest in her situation. It wasn't mere opposition to Farrow, but recognition of a pattern he had experienced himself, the systematic destruction of someone who represented a challenge to Farrow's absolute authority. And I became another piece in this ongoing conflict, she concluded. You became another potential victim, Rivera corrected. But you can choose to become something more, a builder rather than merely a survivor. The children at Copper Creek need education, need someone who sees beyond mere economic value to their worth as human beings. That opportunity exists regardless of my history with Farrow. His explanation, forthright and unsentimental, confirmed Layla's instinctive trust in his intentions. Whatever lay ahead at Copper Creek, Rivera's motivations appeared grounded in principles she could respect. They resumed their journey, the wagon climbing steadily into higher elevations, where desert gradually yielded to scattered juniper and piñon pines. The air grew cooler, carrying hints of mineral scents from the surrounding rocks. How much influence does Farrow have beyond Rattlesnake Junction? Layla asked as they navigated a particularly steep section of road. Considerable but not unlimited, Rivera replied. The territorial governor has begun investigating complaints about consolidated power in outlying settlements. Farrow's methods attract less scrutiny than they once did. He pointed toward a distant ridgeline. Copper Creek lies just beyond that rise. Once we're there, you'll have the protection of territorial mining laws. As company teacher, you'll have legal status Farrow cannot easily challenge without exposing his own questionable practices. As promised, they reached the mining settlement before sunset. Copper Creek surprised Layla with its orderly appearance, far from the chaotic mud-streaked camps depicted in newspaper illustrations. Neat rows of simple cabins stretched along both sides of a central thoroughfare. A larger building with a bell tower clearly served as both school and meeting hall, while several sturdy structures housed mining operations and equipment. Children played under watchful maternal eyes, and off-duty miners gathered in small groups, their conversation pausing as Rivera's wagon approached. Unlike the suspicious stares Layla had encountered in Rattlesnake Junction, these gazes held simple curiosity rather than hostility. Rivera halted the wagon before a modest cabin set slightly apart from the others. "This will be your quarters," he explained, helping Layla down. It was built for the previous teacher, basic but comfortable. Before they could retrieve her belongings, a stout woman with steel-grey hair and practical clothing approached purposefully. Her weathered face suggested years of frontier living, but her direct gaze carried intelligence and assessment rather than judgment. "So this is our new teacher," she stated, looking Layla over with brisk efficiency. "I'm Martha Caldwell, Mr. Rivera. My husband mentioned you'd found someone suitable." "Mrs. Caldwell," Rivera acknowledged respectfully. "This is Miss Layla Nazari. She comes highly recommended by Vivian Abernathy from Rattlesnake Junction." "Any friend of Vivian's is welcome here," Martha declared, her expression softening slightly, "though I understand your departure from town was rather hasty." "Circumstances required immediate action," Rivera confirmed. "Sheriff Fletcher may follow once he reports to Farrow. I've stationed men on the approach road to provide warning." Martha's mouth tightened into a grim line. "That man never learns, does he? Well, he'll find a different reception here than he's accustomed to in town." She turned to Layla. "Come along, dear. You must be exhausted and hungry after such a journey. Let's get you settled while Mr. Rivera sees to security matters." The cabin's interior proved simple but carefully prepared. A single room served as both bedroom and living area, with a small wood stove for cooking and heating. A narrow bed with clean linens occupied one corner, while a solid table and 2 chairs stood near the room's only window. Bookshelves lined one wall, mostly empty but ready for use. "The previous teacher left most furnishings," Martha explained, lighting the cabin's lamps against the gathering darkness. "We've kept everything clean and ready. The outhouse is just behind, and there's a community bathhouse for women on Tuesdays. And Fridays? Other days, it's reserved for the miners." She pointed toward a copper basin and pitcher on a small stand. "Fresh water is delivered daily. The camp well provides clean drinking water, one of the advantages of our location." Layla set down her carpet bag, experiencing a complex mixture of gratitude, anxiety, and relief. Within hours, her entire situation had transformed, from imperiled guest at the Desert Rose to independent teacher with her own quarters, however humble. "I don't know how to thank you for such a welcome," she said sincerely. Martha waved away her thanks with practical efficiency. "Save your gratitude until you've met the children. 8 of them, ages 6 to 13, with education levels scattered across that spectrum. Several speak English as a second language." "I have experience with multi-level teaching," Layla assured her. "In Chicago, I assisted at a settlement house where immigrant children from various backgrounds learned together." "Good," Martha nodded, approvingly. "Because you'll begin tomorrow. No sense in delay with young minds waiting. I've kept basic lessons going since Mr. Patterson left, but I'm no teacher by training." A knock at the door announced Rivera's return. "Everything secure?" Martha asked as he entered. "For now," he confirmed. "Sentries are posted, and the men have been informed of possible trouble." He handed Layla a small key. "For your door. Not that you'll need it here, but it might provide peace of mind until you're accustomed to camp life." The consideration touched Layla unexpectedly. Such a small thing, yet it acknowledged her transition from city life to this remote community required adjustment. "Thank you," she said, accepting the key, "for everything." Rivera's expression remained controlled, but something in his eyes suggested recognition of the weight behind her simple words. "You'll join us for evening meal at the Common Hall?" The camp traditionally welcomes new arrivals together. The prospect of meeting the entire community at once seemed overwhelming after the day's events, but Layla straightened her shoulders and nodded. "Of course, I'd be honored." After Rivera departed, Martha helped Layla unpack and refresh herself before the community dinner. As they walked toward the common hall, the older woman offered practical advice about camp customs and personalities. The miners are decent men, primarily family folk, though some single workers remain respectful but reserved with women, she explained. We maintain stricter standards here than you'd find in most mining camps. Rivera's influence. No excessive drinking, no brothel, regular church services for those inclined, though attendance isn't mandatory. She glanced at Layla's Hamza pendant, but made no comment beyond, religious freedom is respected here, so long as no one imposes their views on others. We have Catholics, Protestants of various stripes, 2 Jewish families, and several workers, who follow traditions from their homelands. And you? Layla ventured. What is your role in the community? Martha's brisk manner softened slightly. Officially, I'm the engineer's wife. Unofficially, I'm midwife, dispute settler, and keeper of social standards. Frontier communities need structure to prevent chaos, especially when children are present. The common hall buzzed with conversation as they entered. Nearly 50 adults and a dozen children gathered at long tables. A hush fell momentarily as heads turned toward them, followed by Rivera's voice from the front of the room. Friends, a new teacher has arrived, he announced. Miss Layla Nazari comes to us from Chicago by way of Rattlesnake Junction. She brings experience teaching children of diverse backgrounds and will begin classes tomorrow. What followed astonished Layla after her reception in town. Genuine, welcoming smiles, respectful nods, and children's curious faces showing interest rather than suspicion. She was guided to a seat of honor near Martha and her husband, the camp engineer, who greeted her with simple courtesy. Throughout the meal, hearty stew, fresh bread, and surprisingly good coffee, various community members approached to introduce themselves. The mine physician, Dr. Henderson, offered medical supplies for the school. Mrs. Ortega, who supervised the camp laundry, promised to show Layla the most efficient washing methods for desert conditions. Mr. Cohen, who maintained camp equipment, mentioned books his family could loan for the students. Each interaction reinforced what Rivera had told her. Copper Creek functioned not merely as a workplace, but as an intentional community built on principles of mutual respect and cooperation. As the evening concluded, Rivera approached her again. "Your first impressions?" he asked quietly. "I'm overwhelmed," Layla admitted. "Everyone seems so accepting without knowing anything about me." "They know what matters," Rivera replied. "That you're qualified to teach their children and brave. Enough to stand against Pharaoh's tactics. The rest, your background, your beliefs, those are your business unless you choose to share them." He glanced toward the doorway where several miners had gathered, looking out into the darkness. "Fletcher and his men won't attempt anything tonight. The approach is too difficult in darkness, but they'll likely arrive tomorrow. When they do, stay within the camp boundaries. Territorial mining law limits their authority here." "What will happen?" Layla asked. Rivera's expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. "That depends on what instructions Pharaoh has given them. But whatever comes, remember that you're not facing it alone anymore." As Layla prepared for sleep in her new cabin that night, she reflected on the extraordinary transformation of her circumstances in a single day. From threatened isolation in Rattlesnake Junction to welcomed member of this unusual community, the shift seemed almost too sudden to fully comprehend. Outside her window, the high desert night revealed stars with crystalline clarity, more brilliant than she had ever seen in Chicago or even Rattlesnake Junction. Their ancient light reflected patterns unchanged since her ancestors had first studied the heavens, finding divine order in celestial movements. "The path reveals itself step by step," she whispered, recalling her grandmother's wisdom. "We need only the courage to place our foot upon it, even when darkness surrounds us." For the first time since arriving in the Arizona territory, Layla felt something beyond mere determination, a genuine sense of possibility that transcended survival. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring with Fletcher's arrival, she would face them not as an isolated foreigner, but as someone with purpose and community. She slipped her mother's prayer book from its wrapping and opened to the familiar passage. Truth is a pathway that cannot be obscured forever. Those who walk it with sincere hearts will find companions for the journey, sent by the divine when most needed. The words, read countless times before, now carried new resonance as she considered Miguel Rivera's unexpected intervention in her life. A man whose own journey through darkness had somehow led him to create this improbable haven where differences were respected rather than feared. Morning at Copper Creek arrived with a clarity unlike anything Layla had experienced in Chicago or even Rattlesnake Junction. The mountain air carried the scent of pinyon pines and mineral-rich soil, while birdsong replaced the usual clamor of commerce and livestock. She rose before dawn, completing her prayers as golden light spilled across the eastern ridges, transforming the landscape from shadow to brilliant detail. Today marked her first day as teacher at the mining camp's small school, a responsibility she approached with both excitement and trepidation. More concerning was Rivera's warning that Sheriff Fletcher and his deputies would likely arrive from town, bringing Pharaoh's influence to bear against her newfound sanctuary. A knock at her door announced Martha Caldwell, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Breakfast," Martha explained, entering with her characteristic brisk efficiency. "Fresh bread, preserves, and coffee. Thought you might appreciate a quiet meal before facing 8 energetic children." "That's incredibly thoughtful," Layla said, genuinely touched by the consideration. Martha set about arranging the simple meal on Layla's small table. "The children will gather at 8. The bell tower has a functional bell, 3 ring signals. School beginning." As they shared breakfast, Martha provided essential background on each student, information that revealed both her keen observation and genuine concern for the children's well-being. A Miguel Ortega, age 13, oldest student, bright but restless, works part-time helping his father maintain mine equipment, speaks English and Spanish fluently, could help translate for his younger cousins if needed. Elizabeth and Samuel. Cohen, 11 and 9. Parents run the camp store, well-read, especially in history and mathematics. Their mother taught in Boston before marriage. Li Wei and Li Jun, twins, age 10. Father is chief engineer for the new shaft. Speak Mandarin at home but good English in school. Exceptional drawing skills, particularly mechanical illustrations. Thomas Henderson, 8. Son of our camp physician. Curious about science but struggles with reading. Possible vision problems. His father hasn't fully acknowledged. Mary Caldwell, my granddaughter, 7, lives with us since her mother's passing last winter. Quiet but observant, needs encouragement to participate. Sean O'Malley, 6, youngest student. Parents work double shifts at the mine to save money for their own claim. Sometimes falls asleep during lessons from insufficient rest at home. This detailed knowledge of each child reinforced Layla's growing impression of Copper Creek as a community rather than merely a workplace. Martha spoke of miners' children with the same attention she might give her own family. Their strengths, challenges, and circumstances all carefully noted and addressed. "The schoolhouse has basic supplies," Martha continued, gathering their empty cups. "Slates, chalk, a few textbooks, mostly McGuffey readers of various levels and Pike's arithmetic. The previous teacher left instructional materials, though some are worn from use." "I brought some of my own books," Layla offered, "and I've developed methods for teaching with limited resources." Martha nodded approvingly. "Good. Frontier teaching requires innovation." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "Rivera posted additional men on the approach road this morning. Fletcher and his deputies were spotted about 5 miles out, moving slowly due to unfamiliar terrain." Layla's stomach tightened at this confirmation of Rivera's prediction. What should I expect when they arrive? Stay with the children in the schoolhouse, Martha advised. Rivera and the men will handle Fletcher. The school is considered protected territory under mining law. Even a town sheriff needs specific cause to enter during sessions. With this troubling backdrop, Layla gathered her teaching materials and walked to the schoolhouse at the center of camp. The simple structure featured a single large room with rows of mismatched benches and desks, a blackboard mounted on the far wall, and surprisingly large windows that filled the space with natural light. A pot-bellied stove occupied one corner, currently cold in the mild autumn weather but ready for winter's approach. At precisely 8 o'clock, Layla rang the bell, its clear tone echoing across the settlement. Within minutes, children arrived. Some running eagerly, others moving with sleepy reluctance, all regarding her with undisguised curiosity. "Good morning," she greeted them with a warm smile. "I'm Miss Nazary, your new teacher." Young Sean O'Malley, a freckled boy with unruly red hair, blurted out what the others clearly wondered. "Are you really from Persia?" Mrs. Caldwell said, "That's near where the 3 wise men came from." The innocent question broke the tension, bringing laughter from the older children and a blush to Sean's cheeks. "I was born in America," Layla explained kindly. "But my parents came from Persia, which is now called Iran. And yes, it's in the same region where the biblical magi originated, according to tradition." "Do you speak Persian?" asked Elizabeth Cohen, her intelligent eyes bright with interest. "I do," Layla confirmed, "along with English and some Arabic and Turkish." "Could you teach us some words?" Miguel Ortega asked, his initial teenage indifference yielding to genuine curiosity. This unexpected interest in her heritage, so different from the suspicion she'd encountered in Rattlesnake Junction, touched Layla deeply. "Perhaps we could have a short language lesson each week, exploring different tongues spoken by people in this very camp. But first, let's begin with assessments, so I understand what each of you has already learned." The morning progressed more smoothly than Layla had dared hope. She quickly established a system where older students worked independently on mathematics or composition, while she conducted reading groups with younger children. When advanced students completed their assigned work, they helped struggling learners, creating a collaborative atmosphere that transcended age differences. By midday, Layla had identified each child's educational level and begun formulating a structured plan for advancing their knowledge. More importantly, she'd established rapport with each student, finding Mary Caldwell's hidden interest in poetry, discovering Thomas Henderson indeed needed spectacles for reading, and recognizing the Lee twins' extraordinary talent for technical. Drawing could enhance science lessons for the entire class. She was so engaged with her students that she almost forgot Sheriff Fletcher's impending arrival, until the distant sound of horses and men's voices filtered through the schoolhouse. Windows. The older children tensed immediately, recognizing potential conflict. "Continue with your reading, please," Layla instructed calmly, moving to the window. In the central clearing between buildings, she could see Rivera and several miners forming a reception committee as 4 riders approached, Sheriff Fletcher and 3 deputies, dust-covered and clearly irritated from their journey. "Miss Nazary," Miguel Ortega called softly, joining her at the window. "My father says those men came to take you back to town." "They may try," Layla acknowledged, appreciating the boy's directness, "but Mr. Rivera and the other adults will handle the situation. Our job is to continue learning." She turned back to the class with a reassuring smile. "Now, who can recite the multiplication table through 9? Outside, the confrontation unfolded with tense formality. Though she couldn't hear the exact exchange, Layla could see Fletcher gesturing emphatically, while Rivera remained unmoved, arms crossed and posture unyielding. The sheriff eventually produced a document, which Rivera examined briefly before handing it back with a dismissive gesture. The standoff continued for several minutes, before Fletcher and his men retreated to the edge of the settlement, clearly frustrated but not departing entirely. They established a makeshift camp within sight of the main buildings, a concerning development suggesting they intended to maintain pressure rather than return to Rattlesnake Junction. When school concluded, at 3 o'clock, Rivera himself arrived to escort Layla and the children safely to their homes. His expression revealed little, but the tension in his shoulders told Layla that the morning's confrontation had merely postponed rather than resolved the conflict. "The children did wonderfully today," she commented as they walked, intentionally, focusing on positive matters within hearing of her students. "I'm glad to hear it," Rivera replied, matching her tone while scanning their surroundings with watchful eyes. Mrs. Caldwell mentioned their excitement about learning Persian words. "They showed impressive curiosity about different cultures," Layla confirmed, something often lacking in adults. After delivering the last child to their parents, Rivera finally addressed the situation directly. "Fletcher brought a court order signed by Judge Wilson, Pharaoh's tool on the territorial bench. It demands your return to Rattlesnake Junction to answer charges of theft." "Theft?" Layla echoed incredulously. "What could I possibly have stolen?" "According to the document, valuable items from the Desert Rose Inn. Pharaoh claims Vivian reported the theft after your departure." Rivera's expression darkened. "It's fabricated, of course. Vivian would never make such a claim, but she wouldn't have opportunity to refute it before the judge issued the order." "Then why didn't Fletcher simply arrest me?" Layla asked, struggling to understand the legal maneuvering. "Because I challenged the jurisdiction," Rivera explained as they reached her cabin. "Mining settlements operate under separate territorial authority. Local sheriffs can't execute warrants within our boundaries without permission from the mining commissioner or federal marshal, neither of whom has authorized this action." He glanced toward the deputy's distant camp. "Fletcher knows this, but hopes to intimidate you into surrendering voluntarily. Failing that, he'll maintain presence until Pharaoh arranges more substantial legal pressure." "What options do we have?" Layla asked, the fragility of her newfound security suddenly apparent. "I've sent riders to Phoenix with documentation of Fletcher's overreach and Pharaoh's pattern of legal manipulation. The territorial governor has been investigating similar complaints from other communities. This could provide the evidence needed for intervention." Rivera's tone suggested limited confidence in this solution. "Until then, we maintain boundaries. You stay within the settlement, always accompanied by trustworthy escorts." That evening, the community gathered for dinner with deliberate normalcy. Despite the deputy's watching presence, children chatted about their first day with the new teacher, miners discussed work progress, and women exchanged recipes and household advice. Yet beneath this ordinary conversation ran currents of tension and protective vigilance. Layla noticed the strategic positioning of armed miners at camp perimeters, and the careful rotation of men leaving dinner to maintain surveillance. These people, many whom she'd just met, were risking Pharaoh's hostility to protect her, a sobering realization that both humbled and concerned her. "You're worried about bringing trouble to these families," Martha observed quietly as they helped. "Serve coffee after the meal. They have children, livelihoods at stake," Layla acknowledged, "all because I refused one man's inappropriate conditions." Martha's weathered face hardened with surprising ferocity. "Don't mistake their actions for mere charity. These people defend you because Pharaoh threatens everything they've built here. If he can use false charges to extract anyone from this community, none of us are truly safe." She passed Layla a coffee pot with deliberate emphasis. "Besides, these miners have weathered cave-ins, claimed jumpers and flash floods. 4 town deputies don't particularly frighten them." 3 days passed in this uneasy standoff. Layla maintained school sessions with determined normalcy, refusing to let the children's education suffer from adult conflicts. Fletcher and his deputies remained encamped at the settlement's edge, occasionally approaching the boundaries, only to be turned away by Rivera's men. On the fourth morning, everything changed. Layla had just begun the day's lessons when hoofbeats approached at alarming speed. The schoolhouse door burst open as Rivera appeared, his usual composure visibly shaken. "Children, school is dismissed early today," he announced firmly. "Return to your homes immediately and stay there until your parents come for you." The students scrambled to gather their belongings, sensing the urgency behind his directive. Once they had departed, Rivera turned to Layla, his expression grave. "Pharaoh himself is approaching with 15 armed men, not deputies, but hired guns from outside the territory. Scouts spotted them an hour ago, moving fast." Cold dread settled in Layla's stomach. "How is that possible? Wouldn't your sentries have seen them coming along the main road?" "They're not using the road," Rivera explained grimly. "They're coming through Miller's Canyon to the east. Difficult passage, but it bypasses our regular watches. Someone familiar with local terrain is guiding them." The strategic implications were clear. Pharaoh had abandoned legal pretense for direct force, choosing a route specifically to surprise the mining settlement. Such escalation revealed both his obsession with controlling Layla's fate and his willingness to risk violent confrontation to maintain his authority. "What can we do?" she asked, mind racing for solutions that wouldn't endanger the families who had shown her such kindness. Rivera's hand moved instinctively to the revolver at his hip. "We've positioned men to intercept them before they reach the settlement. The women and children are gathering at the mine entrance. The tunnels provide shelter if fighting erupts." "This is madness," Layla whispered, "all because one man cannot tolerate being refused." "It's not about you anymore," Rivera stated bluntly. "It's about power. Pharaoh can't allow any challenge to his authority to succeed. Every person who defies him and prospers threatens the fear that keeps others submissive." He guided her quickly toward the mine entrance, where families were already gathering under Martha's efficient direction. "Stay with the others. I need to organize our defense." "Wait!" Layla called as he turned to leave. "There must be another solution. 15 armed men against your miners. People will die. There must be an alternative to bloodshed." Rivera paused, conflict evident in his expression. "What would you suggest?" "Surrendering yourself to Pharaoh would only confirm that violence achieves his goals." An idea formed in Layla's mind. Dangerous, perhaps foolish, but potentially the only way to prevent senseless bloodshed. What if we could expose Pharaoh's tactics to authorities who could actually intervene? You mentioned the territorial governor was investigating similar complaints. "Governor Davis has been gathering evidence for months," Rivera confirmed, "but Pharaoh is careful to maintain plausible deniability. Without witnessing his methods firsthand, official action remains limited." "Then, let him reveal himself," Layla suggested, her voice steadying as the plan crystallized. "Not to me alone in Rattlesnake Junction, but here with witnesses who can't be intimidated or bribed into silence." Rivera's eyes narrowed as he followed her reasoning. "You're suggesting we let Pharaoh enter the settlement under controlled conditions?" "No, force him to reveal his true intentions before neutral observers." "Exactly," Layla affirmed. "Is there anyone nearby with sufficient authority to witness and document such a confrontation? Someone beyond Pharaoh's influence?" Rivera considered this question with intense concentration. Federal Marshal Bennett was investigating silver claim disputes near Tucson. If we could get word to him— "Is that possible?" Layla pressed, sensing a potential avenue to resolution. "Perhaps," Rivera allowed, clearly weighing risks against possibilities. "Jacob Cohen, our storekeeper, was cavalry before settling here. He knows the region better than anyone and could reach the telegraph station at Morgan Creek in 3 hours if he leaves immediately." Then we need only delay Pharaoh's approach until Marshal Bennett could arrive, Layla reasoned. How long from Morgan Creek to here? 6 hours hard riding, if Bennett leaves immediately after receiving the telegram, Rivera calculated. But diverting Pharaoh's force for that duration without arousing suspicion would be nearly impossible. Layla straightened, decision forming with clarity that surprised even herself. Then we don't divert them. I'll meet with Pharaoh, alone. Absolutely not, Rivera objected immediately. The man is dangerous and increasingly desperate. He won't harm me physically, Layla countered, with more confidence than she truly felt. His entire facade depends on maintaining the appearance of legitimate authority. Violence against a woman would undermine that pretense, especially with his men as witnesses, she continued before Rivera could raise further objections. I can insist on meeting in the settlement center, where your men could observe without. And being obvious, I can engage Pharaoh in extended negotiation, reasoning, appeals, anything to consume time until Marshal Bennett arrives. Rivera studied her with an intensity that seemed to evaluate not just her plan, but the courage behind it. You understand the risk you're proposing. If Pharaoh suspects delay tactics, then I must be convincing, Layla concluded simply. My people have a saying, truth sustains the tongue even when words falter. I will speak truthfully about my objections to his conditions, my right to live according to my principles. Such honesty requires no artifice to maintain. The conflict in Rivera's expression revealed his struggle between tactical assessment and personal concern. Finally, he nodded with reluctant acceptance. Cohen leaves immediately for Morgan Creek. We'll send runners to intercept Pharaoh, informing him you're willing to discuss terms personally if he approaches peacefully. Tell him I've recognized the futility of resistance, Layla suggested. That should appeal to his sense of inevitable victory. As Rivera departed to implement their desperate strategy, Martha approached with characteristic directness. I couldn't help overhearing. You're placing yourself in considerable danger, young woman. There seems no alternative that doesn't risk greater harm to innocent people, Layla replied. Martha's weathered face softened unexpectedly. Your ancestors would be proud. The ancient Persians valued truth above all virtues, did they not? Surprised by the older woman's knowledge, Layla nodded. Asha, truth and righteousness, forms the foundation of our spiritual tradition. Then perhaps this confrontation was inevitable from the moment you refused to compromise those principles. Martha observed, some battles choose us rather than the reverse. While Cohen rode hard for Morgan Creek and runners departed to intercept Pharaoh's approaching force, the mining settlement transformed into a carefully orchestrated stage for the coming confrontation. Women and children withdrew to the mine tunnels for safety, while miners positioned themselves strategically throughout the camp, visible enough to deter impulsive violence, but not so prominently as to provoke immediate conflict. Rivera insisted on minimum conditions before allowing Pharaoh's approach. He could bring only 4 men into the settlement proper, the remainder to wait beyond the eastern ridge. All parties would maintain visible distance from their weapons, and the meeting would occur in the open clearing before the company office, where conversation could be witnessed by multiple observers. By midday, dust from approaching riders appeared on the eastern trail. Through Rivera's brass spyglass, Layla could make out Pharaoh at the head of his hired force, his elegant attire incongruous among rougher men clearly selected for intimidation rather than respectability. Marshal Bennett couldn't possibly arrive for at least 5 more hours, Rivera informed her grimly. You'll need to extend conversation significantly. I'll manage, Layla assured him, though her racing heart betrayed the calm she struggled to project. Pharaoh enjoys explanations of his own cleverness. I'll provide ample opportunity for such indulgence. Rivera's expression revealed unexpected concern beneath his tactical focus. If circumstances deteriorate, withdraw immediately. To the company office. We've fortified the back room as precaution. As Pharaoh and his chosen 4 companions approached the settlement boundaries, Layla took her position in the central clearing. She wore her simplest dress. Practical grey, complemented by her silver Hamsa pendant, displayed prominently at her throat. The symbol of protection now served as deliberate statement of the principles she refused to abandon. Pharaoh dismounted with exaggerated courtesy, his expression combining triumph with barely disguised contempt. Miss Nazari, how gratifying to find you finally embraced reason. This unfortunate episode has disrupted business far too long. Mr. Pharaoh, Layla acknowledged with controlled dignity, I requested this meeting to understand precisely what resolution you seek. Sheriff Fletcher's vague accusations of theft seemed merely pretextual. Pharaoh smiled thinly, removing his riding gloves with theatrical precision. Perceptive as always, the legal formalities were simply the most efficient mechanism to secure your return to Rattlesnake Junction. The underlying issue remains your contractual obligation. I signed no contract, Layla countered calmly. Our correspondence established potential for matrimonial arrangement, subject to mutual satisfaction upon meeting. I found terms unsatisfactory and declined accordingly. Splitting hairs over semantics, Pharaoh dismissed with a wave. The practical reality remains. Significant expenses were incurred bringing you west based on your expressed interest. Compensation is simply appropriate business practice. Layla recognized the opening to extend conversation through reasoned debate. Perhaps we should examine the specific expenses you believe require reimbursement. Detailed accounting might establish reasonable settlement. From the corner of her eye, she noted Rivera's subtle nod of approval as Pharaoh launched into extensive enumeration of costs, embellishing each with unnecessary elaboration that consumed precious minutes. The verbal sparring continued with deliberate and pace, Layla questioning calculations, Pharaoh defending with increasingly complex justifications, neither reaching resolution but both maintaining superficial civility that prevented escalation to more dangerous confrontation. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the clearing, Pharaoh's patience visibly thinned. Enough circuitous negotiation, Miss Nazari. My terms remain simple. Either return to Rattlesnake Junction under my protection to resolve these matters properly, or Mr. Rivera and his mining operation will face consequences beyond your imagination. What consequences specifically? Layla pressed, attempting to draw explicit threats that could later be documented. Pharaoh stepped closer, voice lowering though still audible to nearby observers. Frontier accidents occur with tragic regularity. Mine cave-ins, inexplicable fires, contaminated water supplies, unfortunate incidents that prosperous operations somehow avoid when properly aligned with regional interests. You're threatening the safety of innocent families, Layla stated, maintaining composure despite her racing heart. Children included. I'm describing natural consequences of poor business decisions, Pharaoh corrected with practiced deniability. Mr. Rivera's unreasonable protection of a fugitive from legitimate authority creates unfortunate vulnerability to existing hazards. Simple reality of frontier existence. Before Layla could respond, commotion at the settlement's western approach drew all attention. Riders approached at speed. Not Pharaoh's remaining men, but a group of 7 mounted figures, led by a broad-shouldered man whose dust-covered clothing couldn't disguise the unmistakable authority of his bearing or the federal badge visible. On his chest, the timing couldn't have been more perfect had they planned it. Pharaoh's explicit threats hung in the air, witnessed by multiple observers, just as Marshal Bennett and his deputies arrived to hear his final words. Federal Marshal, Rivera called out, stepping forward with deliberate visibility. "Your presence is most fortuitously timed." Marshal James Bennett dismounted with the fluid efficiency of a man accustomed to arriving at volatile situations. Dust coated his weathered duster, evidence of hard riding from Morgan Creek, yet his penetrating gaze missed nothing as he surveyed the tense tableau, Farrow and his companions facing Layla, with Rivera's miners positioned strategically throughout. "The settlement. Interesting gathering," Bennett observed, his voice carrying the calm authority of federal law. "Mr. Cohen's telegram mentioned potential armed conflict. Appears I've arrived at a critical moment." Farrow recovered quickly from his surprise, smoothly transitioning to the courteous deference he reserved for those whose authority surpassed his own. "Marshal Bennett, an unexpected pleasure. I'm Douglas Farrow of Rattlesnake Junction. This is merely a civil matter requiring no federal attention, a contractual dispute with this young woman who fled legal proceedings." "That's so." Bennett turned toward Layla, his assessment neither judgmental nor sympathetic, simply analytical. "Ma'am, your perspective." "I came west in response to Mr. Farrow's correspondence seeking a potential wife," Layla explained with quiet dignity. "Upon meeting, I discovered conditions incompatible with my principles and declined the arrangement. Mr. Farrow has since employed increasingly coercive tactics to force compliance, culminating in fabricated theft charges and armed men surrounding this settlement." Bennett nodded, absorbing her account without visible reaction. "And you, Mr. Rivera, your involvement?" "Miss Nazari accepted employment as teacher for our mining families," Rivera stated. "Mr. Farrow objects to her independence and has escalated from legal harassment to direct threats against our operation if we continue providing her sanctuary." "Preposterous exaggeration," Farrow interjected. "Sheriff Fletcher merely attempted to serve valid warrants, which Mr. Rivera obstructed, forcing this regrettable show of strength to uphold territorial law." 15 armed men seems excessive for serving documents, Bennett observed dryly, gesturing toward Farrow's additional force positioned beyond the ridge. "Particularly when approaching through concealed canyon routes, rather than the main road." The marshal's knowledge of Farrow's complete force visibly unnerved him, a prudent precaution given Rivera's history of armed resistance to legitimate authority. Bennett removed his dusty hat, revealing iron-gray hair and eyes that had witnessed decades of frontier deception. "Fortunate timing, my arriving just as you were explaining natural consequences of defying your authority, particularly vivid descriptions of mine accidents and contaminated water." "A misinterpretation of business advice," Farrow countered, though his confidence had diminished. "Miss Nazari's inexperience with frontier realities led to unfortunate misunderstanding. 7 witnesses heard precisely the same misunderstanding," Rivera noted. "Remarkable consistency for misinterpretation." The marshal's weathered face revealed nothing as he assessed conflicting claims, yet his decisive actions demonstrated he'd reached conclusions. "Here's how we'll proceed. Deputies will escort Mr. Farrow's associates beyond settlement boundaries. All armed personnel will withdraw immediately to Rattlesnake Junction." To Farrow himself, Bennett continued with implacable authority. "You'll accompany me to the company office to review documentation of these competing claims. Miss Nazari and Mr. Rivera will present their evidence of harassment, while you'll provide the legal warrants and contractual obligations you reference." Farrow's expression darkened as control of the situation slipped from his grasp. "I must protest this federal intrusion into matters clearly within territorial jurisdiction. Sheriff Fletcher is notably absent from this confrontation despite allegedly serving official warrants," Bennett finished pointedly. "Additionally, Governor Davis specifically authorized my intervention following multiple complaints about irregularities in Rattlesnake Junction's legal proceedings." For perhaps the first time since Layla had encountered him, Douglas Farrow appeared genuinely unsettled. The calculated manipulations that functioned effectively within his sphere of influence faltered against federal authority operating beyond his control. Under protest, "I'll cooperate with this irregular procedure," Farrow finally conceded, his tone suggesting magnificent concession rather than forced compliance. As Farrow's men withdrew under deputy supervision, the atmosphere throughout the settlement visibly transformed. Women and children emerged cautiously from mine tunnel shelters, and miners lowered weapons that had been held in readiness for potential conflict. Inside the company office, Marshal Bennett established a remarkably formal proceeding given the frontier circumstances. A deputy recorded testimony, while Bennett examined documents from both parties, Farrow's alleged warrants and contracts, alongside evidence Rivera had meticulously gathered, documenting the pattern of harassment. Layla presented her account with composed clarity, explaining her journey west, the incompatible expectations revealed upon meeting Farrow, and the systematic elimination of alternatives that followed her refusal. Each opportunity for independent employment was undermined through Mr. Farrow's influence, she explained. The teaching position withdrawn, merchants instructed against hiring me, and finally fabricated criminal charges when opportunity arose beyond his immediate control. Farrow dismissed her testimony as emotional misinterpretation of standard business practices, yet his counter-evidence proved remarkably thin when subjected to Bennett's experienced scrutiny. The theft warrant bore Judge Wilson's signature but lacked properly documented witness statements. The supposed contractual obligation consisted merely of hotel receipts and stagecoach tickets, evidence of expenses but not binding agreement. Most damaging was Vivian Abernathy's written statement, delivered with Jacob Cohen from Morgan Creek, explicitly denying any theft report and documenting Farrow's systematic efforts to isolate and pressure Layla into compliance. By evening, Bennett had heard sufficient evidence to render preliminary judgment. The mining settlement's residents gathered in the common hall as the marshal delivered his findings with formal gravity. Having reviewed available evidence and testimony, I find insufficient basis for criminal charges against Miss Nazari, Bennett announced. The warrant is vacated pending further investigation of its irregular issuance. Additionally, no valid contractual obligation exists beyond reasonable compensation for actual expenses incurred, which Miss Nazari indicates willingness to arrange through appropriate installments. To Farrow specifically, Bennett continued with unmistakable warning. More concerning are documented patterns of intimidation, potential abuse of legal processes, and statements witnessed today that could constitute criminal threats. Governor Davis has authorized comprehensive investigation of administrative practices in Rattlesnake Junction to commence immediately. This is outrageous federal overreach, Farrow protested, though his customary confidence had diminished significantly. Precisely why Governor Davis initiated this review, Bennett countered evenly, to ensure territorial authority operates according to established law rather than personal influence. Sheriff Fletcher's absence from execution of his own warrants raises particular concerns that will receive thorough examination. The implication was unmistakable. Farrow's carefully constructed system of control faced unprecedented scrutiny from authorities beyond his manipulation. "You'll regret this interference," Farrow stated quietly, directing his cold gaze toward Rivera. "Frontier conditions change rapidly. Federal presence is temporary, while regional relationships endure." "Are you threatening federal witnesses, Mr. Farrow?" Bennett inquired mildly, though the dangerous undertone was unmistakable. Recognizing his precarious position, Farrow retreated to superficial compliance. "Merely observing frontier realities, Marshal. I'll cooperate fully with your investigation." while maintaining absolute confidence in my vindication. Bennett assigned 2 deputies to escort Pharaoh and his remaining men back to Rattlesnake Junction, with explicit instructions to establish temporary federal presence in the town. Deputy Calloway will maintain an office adjacent to the sheriff's department to receive statements from townspeople regarding any irregularities in local governance, he explained. Federal protection will be provided for those offering testimony. After Pharaoh's departure, genuine celebration erupted throughout the mining settlement. The confrontation that had threatened violence instead concluded with unprecedented intervention that promised lasting change beyond mere temporary reprieve. Governor Davis has suspected problems in outlying settlements for months, Bennett explained to Rivera and Layla as they shared coffee in the now-quiet company office. Pharaoh's operation was particularly difficult to investigate because he maintained careful separation between his instructions and their execution. Your documented evidence provides the connection we've sought between his influence and specific abuses of authority. Will it be enough? Layla asked. Men like Pharaoh often escape consequences through technicalities and connections. Some likely will, Bennett acknowledged frankly. But financial investigations have already begun into irregularities with mining. Claims, mercantile pricing, and property transfers. Pharaoh's empire was built on manipulated legalities that cannot withstand genuine scrutiny. He studied Layla with unexpected perception. Your refusal to compromise principles despite vulnerability created the fracture in his system needed to initiate broader reform. Small acts of moral courage often precede significant change. This observation resonated deeply with Layla's spiritual tradition, which taught that truth ultimately prevailed against falsehood if enough individuals maintained righteous principles. As winter settled over Copper Creek, transformation extended beyond Layla's personal circumstances to encompass the entire region. Federal investigation into Rattlesnake Junction's governance revealed extensive corruption requiring comprehensive reform. Pharaoh himself faced multiple charges related to fraud, witness intimidation, and improper influence over judicial proceedings. More significantly, ordinary citizens previously coerced into compliance with Pharaoh's system gradually found courage to establish independent businesses, fair practices, and genuine community governance. Vivian Abernathy expanded the Desert Rose Inn, incorporating a lending library. The general store introduced fair pricing rather than variable charges based on customer relationship with Pharaoh. The new sheriff, elected without irregular influence, established regular patrols serving outlying homesteads previously left vulnerable. At Copper Creek, Layla's classroom expanded to 14 students, necessitating assistant teachers and more structured educational programs. Martha Caldwell organized women's literacy classes 3 evenings weekly, with Layla providing instruction in basic reading and composition skills. Rivera's vision of expansion progressed systematically, with new mine operations developed according to safety standards exceeding territorial requirements. His reputation for fair labor practices attracted skilled workers seeking alternatives to exploitative conditions elsewhere, creating a thriving community increasingly recognized as model for ethical resource development. Through these external changes, Layla's relationship with Rivera evolved with deliberate mutual respect. Their shared experience confronting Pharaoh created foundation for understanding that transcended cultural differences. Rivera demonstrated genuine interest in Persian traditions, occasionally joining evening gatherings where Layla shared stories and poetry from her heritage. She, in turn, appreciated his practical wisdom and unwavering integrity in building something meaningful from personal tragedy. On a crystal-clear December evening, with snow mantling the surrounding mountains and stars blazing against velvet, Darkness, Rivera invited Layla to view the completion of Copper Creek's newest addition, a small observatory constructed atop the company office. The simple structure housed a telescope of remarkable quality, ordered from Chicago at considerable expense. The mining engineer suggested educational applications, Rivera explained, as Layla examined the instrument with delighted appreciation. Astronomy teaches mathematics, navigation, even philosophy when properly presented. It's magnificent, she breathed, adjusting the focus to reveal Jupiter's distinct bands and visible moons. The children will be fascinated. I thought you might appreciate it personally as well, Rivera observed. You often watch the stars during evening prayers. The thoughtfulness behind this gesture, recognizing her spiritual connection to celestial observation, touched Layla deeply. Few people in her experience had attempted to understand her traditions, much less support them through practical accommodation. As they shared the magnificent vista of mountains and stars, Rivera spoke again, his tone carrying unusual hesitancy. Beneath his customary composure, "I've been considering matters of tradition and adaptation," he began carefully. "How principles remain constant while practices evolve through new understanding and circumstances." Layla sensed significant purpose beneath this philosophical opening, but allowed him to proceed at his chosen pace. "Your faith values truth and righteousness above all," Rivera continued. "Mine was lost and partially recovered through difficult experience, different paths, yet perhaps compatible destinations." He turned toward her directly, the starlight illuminating his weathered features with unusual vulnerability. "I'm not expressing this well. What I'm attempting to ask is whether you might consider a partnership beyond professional collaboration." The carefully framed invitation reflected both respect for her independence and recognition of cultural differences requiring thoughtful navigation. "I would need to maintain my spiritual practices," Layla responded quietly. "My faith remains fundamental to who I am." "I would expect nothing less," Rivera assured her. "Compromise of core principles benefits neither person in genuine partnership." Layla studied the stars momentarily, finding familiar constellations her father had identified during childhood lessons. Those same stars now witnessed this unexpected intersection of divergent life journeys. Her Persian heritage meeting Rivera's complex American experience, two souls shaped by loss, yet refusing bitterness as response. "I would consider such a partnership," she finally answered, her voice soft yet certain. "Not hastily arranged, but deliberately constructed with clear understanding between us." By spring, when wildflowers transformed the high desert landscape from browns to brilliant yellows and purples, Layla and Rivera formalized their partnership through ceremony incorporating elements from both traditions. Their union symbolized more than personal connection. It represented the territory's gradual transformation from lawless exploitation toward ethical development, honoring diverse traditions within framework of mutual respect. As Layla often observed to students struggling with difficult ethical choices, the path of righteousness rarely appears easiest at its beginning. Its rewards emerge through faithful continuation rather than immediate comfort. Truth prevails not through miraculous intervention, but through ordinary people refusing convenient falsehood when confronting systematic wrong. The silver hamsa, pendant she continued wearing throughout her life, the symbol that once provoked Pharaoh's contempt, eventually became recognized throughout the territory as representing educational excellence and ethical leadership. Its meaning expanded beyond personal protection to encompass community resilience built through principled resistance against corruption and exploitation. Thus did one woman's devotion to ancient principles catalyze modern transformation, demonstrating that faithful adherence to truth creates ripples extending far beyond individual circumstance. touching lives, building communities, and ultimately redeeming even the harshest landscapes through persistent application of justice, compassion, and unwavering moral courage. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.